Hotep, and welcome to my sovereign world, where you can find discuss issues on self-empowerment, meditation, self-sustainability living, autonomy, sovereignty, divine law, legalese, and other related issues. Tune in to Don'tGiveUpYourHouse.com updates.
So anyway, get to that point. It doesn't belong to you. Of course, evidence of that is, for those of you that don't believe, take a magnifying glass, look at the bottom right-hand corner of the check that you write, that you get assigned to your, from your account to write from, and you look at the little letters there. The line, what appears to be, or what we think is a line for your signature, is not. It's an authorized. It says authorized representative all the way across. Excuse me. Authorized means the power that someone delegates to another that they held in the first place, and representative means that you're acting on someone else's behalf. Okay, so and not in your own capacity. So anyway, what happens with these at this transaction, you sign a promissory note, and then you also sign a deed of trust or some other type of loan agreement. And this happens across the board, regardless of what type of loan it is. This is an automobile loan or a home loan. What happens is they take your promissory note and they give you a check, or they give the seller a check. One that I actually sat in and witnessed. They actually, as soon as he read the promissory note, he turned it over. He shook his head. Turned it over. He grabbed another piece of paper, but simultaneously with his other hand, he reached over and grabbed the check that had been pre-written to the dealer. And what he did is, finished reading, and he slid the check over to him, and he finished reading the other loan agreements. Now, typically, it doesn't happen like that in most transactions, but that's the one that I actually witnessed. So what they do is they take the promissory note, they deposit it into their account by computer strokes, and then they transfer those funds over to escrow, or those electronic that electronic currency over to escrow. Now, nothing has been established in real life, but only in the computer banking systems. They created that promissory note is by a few strokes of the key. They put that into the computer system on their books. And that's how they operate. That's how they expand the expand debt, and how the monetary system is supposed to catch up to it, which is another impossible contract, which we'll get into. But and then you sign that deed of trust. Now, again, remember, the laws dictate that if that's one transaction, that means those documents are supposed to stick together. It means they're one document. It's just one is actually an addendum or an exhibit of the other that they're attached to. Because in the deed of trust, and they kept this language in there, it says the debt is evidenced by the note. It says that in either the loan agreement and or the deed of trust. But wait a minute, if they're not attached, because here's the proof how you know they're not attached, is what's the first thing with the deed of trust? What's the first thing that bank does when the deed of trust is completed and the transaction is complete? They assign it over to MERS, and MERS is the nominated beneficiary for for the principal. All right. So what that means is the promissory note assigned as well. It didn't say that the promissory note. Nothing ever comes up about the promissory note of being assigned. It only when you do a chain of title, which is something that you must do, a request for chain of title, because if, for example, you had it for several months and they sold it off to another bank, or has transferred it over to another bank, and you're dealing with a different servicer, you definitely do a chain of title. If it's the original one that you sat down and signed the paperwork with, then there's a different strategy that you'll use. So if you sat down in Bank of America's building and they still service your note, you won't necessarily use this one. You use a little different, which essentially we're going to get back to with going through this course here. So with that evidence, you know now that the promissory note was a separate transaction from the deed of trust or the loan agreement. If you know that, then that's the premise that you should operate on. That means that that the deed of trust is an invalid contract for two reasons. Two reasons. One, even before you get to the point of they haven't executed, you get to the point of the elements of a simple contract. And elements of a contract are you have to have capacity or a mental capacity. It means you have to be competent enough to get into a loan, or get into a contract agreement. You have to have full disclosure so that you can have mutual assent, which you have to have a meeting of the minds. If you don't have full disclosure, you cannot have a meeting of the minds. Now, there are some exceptions to those types of to certain contracts from what I hear under admiralty, and I'll show you also how they trick you into an admiralty contract, because technically your contract with the your contract or agreement that they're attempting to enforce on you with the banks are deemed to be an admiralty contract, in which I should say, they show the elements of being an admiralty contract. And if you don't know what that means that it's an international contract, which means you're doing business with a business that is that's in another country, it's cross borders. All right. So anyway, back to this. So they put language in there, colorful language, which doesn't mean anything, that that the deed of trust is referenced to the note or attached to the note. It's not. The reason that we know it's not is because, again, the deed of trust is moved on, and in many cases, many of us have seen when you request a copy of the promissory note, you see an extra stamp on there that was not on there when you signed it. And it says, amongst other things, without recourse, paid to the order of, without recourse, some initials or a signature, right? Well, guess what? That's conversion. Now, if it belongs to you, is that promissory note yours? The deed of trust, if you hand something over to someone, are you giving it to them for them to have, or are they holding it? So that's what we have to determine here. Well, did you give them the promissory note for them to hold for you, or did they purchase it? If they purchased it, then that deed of trust is not only unexecuted, there's no consideration in that contract. If there's no consideration in that contract from the bank, then it's invalid. It doesn't fit, doesn't have all the required elements of a contract. Okay? Under contract law, that is under contract law, that is an invalid agreement. And all you have to do is state that there is no consideration due to the fact that there is no consideration. This doesn't mean it, that it is hereby void from the beginning, nunc pro tunc. Now, there's no requirement for an injunctive relief. Injunctive relief means that you don't have to take them to court. All you have to do is notice them. And, of course, you want witnesses that you've noticed. So this is why an administrative process and or administrative process in using public record is good, because the administrative process merely builds your record for for the correspondence that you've actually already had with them, and you're going to use that as evidence if they ever come against you. Everything that we're saying to you and for your remedies is legitimate. If you don't meet the elements of a contract, how can it be enforced? What they're doing to enforce it is actually violating your right to the process. Can you waive a right accidentally? Some people say yes. Some people say yes, but I'm going to tell you, no, you can't. Who are rights given to you by? It depends on your perspective. If you believe in a higher power, you say the Creator. If you don't, if you're an atheist, you may say nature. Okay, fine. The whole point is that something higher than yourself gave you those rights. You were born with free will. If you don't believe that you were born with rights, you were born with free will. Correct or no? Even as a baby, you can decide to do things right or wrong as you're learning. When I say a baby, I mean someone that actually has motor skills, enough to make a decision that they're going to listen to what mommy or daddy says or not. And, we give motivation for them to listen to one way, but that's still free will. So you have the right to that. That means self-determination. Guess what self-determination means? Self-determination actually means liberty. Okay? So you're actually waiving your right, or accidentally waiving your right to due process, which is enumerated by the Constitution. You do have right to due process. Okay? But you accidentally waive it because now the bank can come and take your house. But guess what? The court can't enforce that, because guess what the job, or the primary job of government is? To secure the rights of individuals. Read your constitutions and read your Declaration of Independence. Read your Enabling Act. I did have an attorney, and I think I've told this story before, but I did have an attorney that told me that the Declaration of Independence was not a legally binding document. But in rebuttal to that, I told her that the Enabling Act, which gave Washington conditional entrance into the Union, stated that they had to adhere to the principles of the Declaration of Independence as well as the Constitution. So then did it not make it a legally binding contract? Answer was yes. Couldn't do anything else but answer that. I mean, if you conditionally allowed it, otherwise they have to go back to being a territory, because it's one of the conditions. So it does become a legally binding document at that point. So my point to you is you can get an injunctive relief on multiple levels, and that is one, to stop, to compel the movement to cease and desist from any actions that he's doing in order for that. Get another injunctive relief to show for and on the record that your evidence is true, and in fact that the contract was invalid, and therefore you get the relief of getting them off your back, and you could actually claim injury. How many of you know of someone or heard of someone that has had to make a decision from paying a mortgage and paying their lights, and their lights get cut off, or paying their mortgage or getting their children some food, so they had to go somewhere where they got cheap and expensive food, and potentially cause a health issue? Have you ever missed a day of work because you've been negotiating with the bank because you don't want them to foreclose, and they actually never had authority in the first place? There's on and on and on down the line. Have you ever been stressed, and that stress made you sick? Gave you cancer, any lesions, whatever the case is, caused you any type of, that's injury, because it's induced off of fraud. Two things: the contract is invalid from the giddy up, from the start. It is invalid because it doesn't meet the criteria, the elements of a contract, and then beyond that, it's unexecuted. They don't give you a loan. They tell you two faces of debt, which is a publication that came out of Central Bank of Chicago. Modern Money Mechanic came out of the same institution. I'll tell you another thing about that in a minute. But those publications, amongst others, that I've read off to many of you before in previous recordings, tell you that they exchange. It is an exchange of currency. That they exchange the promissory note for a credit, or for electronic funds. Expanding the debt is exactly what they tell you. I read a court case, and there were some Moors on there that were attempting to fight a collector in court because he was trying to take their car and so forth. And they were making some good arguments, and they were mixing some things up with the treaty, the friendly treaty, the Treaty of Peace, the Treaty of Friendship, and they were mixing some things up in there. And this is why I want to be very careful that you have to stay on point into relevant arguments, is because they were making some key noted arguments, but the judge was ignoring those and only focusing on the frivolous arguments. He didn't even make comments on the valid arguments. He only made comments on the things that had nothing to do with the case. He focused on those, but he never made a ruling. He gave them an opportunity to amend their complaint, and he said this was going to be the last chance. Now, that was a case that actually just took place this year. I think it's still ongoing. It may actually be ruled upon now, but it won't be published for another 3 months.